Welcome to Community Christian Church, where we are all about helping people find the way back to God. My name is Nick Cox, and I'm so glad to be able to be here on this 4th of July, the birthday of our country. We have so many amazing blessings in our lives and in this country, one of the most important being the freedom to gather together and to worship God freely with one another, a freedom that so many people around our world don't have. Our country is not perfect by any means, but I hope we never take for granted the freedoms that we enjoy. Last week, we kicked off a brand new series of messages called Same Difference, where we are taking a closer look at the book of 1 Corinthians, which is a letter to a brand new church in a city called Corinth. One of the tendencies that we can have is that we can view ourselves as just being so advanced or so civilized, and in many ways we might be. But in many other ways, we're humans to the core, and the story of the Bible is a story about humans. And as we take a closer look at this brand new little church in Corinth and the instructions to this church found in the Bible, I think there's going to be lots of times where it's like looking in the mirror. And if you missed last week here at CCC, really want to encourage you to check it out. One of the things David spoke about last week was a bit of the background about this city. It existed on a major trade route between Asia and Europe, and it became this massive melting pot full of people of different backgrounds and ethnicities and religions and beliefs and practices. You name it. You could find dozens of different ways that people were practicing it in Corinth. Different ways of understanding the world, different gods, ways of worshiping those gods, different teachings and philosophies. Now, Paul, the writer of this letter to the church in Corinth, was a Jewish man who encountered Jesus and came to believe that Jesus is exactly who he said he was, the Son of God, sent to be the Savior of all people through his death and resurrection. And so Paul begins to teach other Jewish people about who Jesus was, about what it means for them, about how Jesus was the fulfillment of this long-awaited promise of a Messiah of the Jewish faith. But many of the Jewish leaders and teachers, they were not interested. And they simply couldn't believe that the Messiah of God could be Jesus. And so Paul was called to shift gears a little bit, and he began to bring the message and the good news of Jesus to those who weren't Jewish, to the Gentiles. And one of the places this leads Paul is to the city of Corinth. In Corinth, this melting pot of people, of beliefs and faiths and teaching, Paul starts a church of people who are learning to be followers of Jesus. Now, this book we're taking a look at, 1 Corinthians, is the letter that Paul writes to this church a few years after the church was founded. This letter was being written to two distinct groups within the church, people with a Jewish background and people with a Greek or Roman background, a non-Jewish background. And you'll notice all throughout this letter the ways in which Paul really addresses each of these groups. What's really interesting is how much this letter could have been written to us, whether that's us here at CCC specifically or just the church in general in 2021. I hope we can really allow ourselves to continue to learn what does it mean to follow Jesus well. Last week, we learned about some of the divisions that were developing within the church of Corinth and the ways that we too are susceptible to fracturing and being divided. Paul warned about how foolish it was to simply rally behind their favorite teacher or their favorite minister and how that would steal away the power and sacrifice of Jesus by creating those divisions. This week, we're going to be jumping right back into the book of 1 Corinthians. So if you have a Bible with you, you can flip over to it. We're going to start right at the end of the first chapter. And this is what Paul writes. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise. The intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Paul's writing how the message of the cross is deeply foolish. For the Hellenized elites, for the sophisticates of Corinth, the cross of Jesus, this convicted felon, this would-be bearer of God's love, I mean, it's just absurd. Compared to the elegant philosophies of Plato and the concept of beautiful and good, what would be more ridiculous and inappropriate symbol for faith than a crucified Jewish man? To the Gentile, the cross was foolishness. To the devout Jew of the first century, what could be more scandalous and sacrilegious than the long-awaited Messiah, a king of the Davidic line, the one before whom all nations would kneel, to be humiliated and spat upon and hung on a cross to die? To the Jew, the cross was foolishness. And Paul is challenging all those listening to this letter in the church, both Greek and Jew, to be forced to look at the foolishness of the cross, because it turns out that it is the great wisdom of God. Paul goes on, he writes this, where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law, which is the highest source of wisdom in the Jewish faith? Where is the philosopher of this age, the highest source of wisdom in the Greek and Roman world? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? And Paul's kind of breaking it down here. He knows his audience. Where are the wise people? The teachers of the law. I'm looking at you, the Jewish elites. And where are the philosophers? I'm looking at you Hellenized Roman elites. Where are the ones who are relying on themselves and their own vision? Where are those who are relying on their own strength to anyone who sees the way that the world works and follows after the things of the world? Well, the things of God, the power of God, the means God uses to display that power, the cross, looks like nothing more than foolishness. Paul goes on in verse 21. God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. And I love how Paul puts it here, because the foolishness of what was being preached, Paul was the one preaching this message, right? He's saying that the foolishness of God, this teaching about the cross of Jesus, for those who believe it, it had the power to save. He goes on. Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. Paul again, right? He's writing distinctly to these two groups within the church, the Jewish background and the Greek and Roman background. And each of these backgrounds are going to have an objection to the cross of Christ. You see, if Jesus had come with a crown and a scepter to rule like Caesar, the Romans would have understood that. Power expressing itself as authority, dominating enemies, placing himself on a throne, controlling power. They were used to kings who claimed to be God. Jesus Caesar would have been something the Roman Christians at Corinth would have been able to be familiar with. If Jesus had come in the same way that King David had came in the history of Israel, this greatest king, the Jews would have understood it. If Jesus was a second coming of this amazing power that would lead this nation to victories on the battlefield, who was a man after God's own heart and stacked up just victory after victory. If Jesus was David reborn, the Jews would have been familiar with that. See, both the Romans and the Jews understood what it meant for God, in whatever form they understood it, to be on a throne and leading people in triumph. God who makes kings and kings who claim to be gods, that was what they understood. But a God convict, God martyr, a homeless God, a betrayed God, a humiliated God, a God defeated, a God executed. As different as the background and belief systems of the Romans and the Jews might have been, and they were vastly different, there was one thing they shared in common with each other, is this sense of knowing what power was and how power led to honor. A God or gods that displayed power demanded honor. And the foolishness of God, this amazing and powerful and deep foolishness of God, is that God's power and authority is displayed in humility, even the humiliation of the cross. Now, when I say the word humility or someone being humble, we tend to think of that as a positive character trait, something to be desired. But this was a completely foreign concept in the ancient world. In ancient Greek and Latin both, humility was not a moral ideal or a character trait worth gaining. It was purely negative. It meant to be low. It meant to be near the ground. It was not a compliment or an ideal. It was an insult. Humility was not something that someone attained for themselves. It was something that was done to them. It was degrading. Literally, it meant taking someone and downgrading their status, downgrading their standing. Humility for the ancient world would be more closely akin to how we understand humiliation. The cross of Jesus Christ was a humiliation. A powerful God, sure. The Christians at Corinth could understand that. A humiliated God, not so much. And it turns out how you see a thing determines how you react to it, doesn't it? My family went to a trip to Disney about 4 years ago. It was a great trip. And it was just so much fun. I mean, a mouse broke into my room and it stole all my money. But other than that, it was just a fantastic trip. And my kids, they were little guys back then. They're 7 and 5 and 2 at the time. And so it's a really fun age to be there. Now, at this time, Disney was really getting into kind of the Star Wars stuff. I mean, it was really starting to lean into it a little bit. So there's stormtroopers marching around and there's parades of Star Wars characters. And it was all really, really cool. But in a pretty unexpected way, my son, who at this point is a first grader, he's kind of freaking out, and not in the nerdy good way like I was. I mean, he's edging away from the stormtroopers. He eventually just kind of runs away. He's in tears and he's upset, and I'm getting aggravated, and things are not going well. And eventually we get him to settle down, and kind of ask him like, man, what's wrong, kiddo? Man, they're just people walking around in costumes. I can tell he's kind of processing what's going on, and we keep talking and he's starting to relax, and he looks at me and he asks, so the stormtroopers' guns, they aren't real? And it hits me. He doesn't realize the stormtroopers aren't actually going to shoot him. He was terrified because he didn't know he wasn't going to be chased down and shot by the villains. And I have to be completely honest, this is not my best parenting moment. It never even occurred to me that he might be confused about this being fiction and that the stormtroopers really weren't a threat. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that if the stormtroopers' rifles were real, if they were the bad guys who might turn and shoot, his reaction makes a whole lot more sense than mine. I'm trying to get a selfie with these guys, and my son is like in real fear running away from them. How we see a thing absolutely impacts how we react to it, doesn't it? And the way we view the power of God and the message of the cross, it matters. Because if Jesus is seen only as the king, only as the Lord, only as the powerful and mighty God, then, well, maybe Jesus is looking for other people who are just like kings, other people who exert their power, other people who could conquer and rule. But here's the point that Paul is really trying to drive home. He was not preaching Jesus Christ, the conquering emperor. He was preaching Jesus Christ crucified, the foolishness of God that defeats the wisdom of the world. And this was the view of Paul. He needed the church at Corinth to understand that they weren't called to do things the way the world was doing things, but to follow a crucified Christ. And this is how Paul goes on to begin chapter 2 of 1 Corinthians. And so it was with me, brothers and sisters, when I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God, for I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness with great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. Paul was a man who had the equivalent of 2 PhDs in theology by the time he was 21, a man who wrote with great insight on the whole scope of theology. Nevertheless, he said that the focal point of his teaching and preaching and ministry among the Corinthians was very intentionally not his own intellect or his own ability or his own knowledge. What he preached was simply Jesus Christ and him crucified. He wanted to teach the Corinthians about the deep things of the character and nature of God the Father. He planned to instruct them about so many things, the Holy Spirit and Christian ethics and how to get along with each other in the scope of who God is. There's so many things that go beyond Christ's work on the cross. But Paul never forgot the central importance of the cross. In effect, Paul, the teacher, is saying to his students, you might forget other things that I teach you. You might forget some of the analogies and the vocabulary. You might forget some of the nuances, but do not forget the cross. Because it was on the cross and through the cross and by the cross that our Savior performed his work of redemption and gathered his people for eternity. You see, Paul knew the temptation to build faith on human understanding and human wisdom. He knew the temptation to limit God to the heights and depths of human understanding. And in this metropolitan crossroad with cultures and teaching and understanding from everywhere in the known world, the pride of knowledge and human understanding was the foundation. And Paul wants to challenge the members of the church at Corinth with Jesus Christ crucified, this foolishness of God, this absurdity to the Greek, this stumbling block to the Jews, this amazing salvation to all who believe. And this is a challenge we can often face in the Christian church. You see, we share a lie, me and you. We have a secret in common. I'll tell you mine, and maybe in telling you mine, I'll also be telling you a little bit of yours. It's a secret that it's not buried too deep, but we don't really dig it up and look at it all that often. You see, I have a problem because I really like to be seen as smart and capable and strong. I enjoy it when people offer me compliments. I want to be known as impressive and capable. I hate and often fear failure. I'm sometimes slow to apologize even when I know I'm absolutely in the wrong. I worry sometimes that I'm just an imposter and I'm faking it. My insecurities, sometimes they whisper to me. Sometimes they yell at me. And so this shared secret of ours, you and I, is at the heart of this paradox of what it means to be a human. We are attracted to and deeply desire to be seen and fully known, while at the same time fearing being seen and fully known. The desire to be strong, the desire to win, to receive the applause of my peers, it tempts me into creating an image around myself and chasing the wisdom of this world. Paul, he understands this desire to be known at war with the fear of being known. And he's challenging us to turn and look at it, to look at our own failings and our own weaknesses, because God longs to use those weaknesses and those failings to show his power. Because if we don't turn and look, if we don't reach for the brake pedal to slow ourselves down, we all run the risk of losing track of who we really are. Bit by bit and piece by piece, we can replace what's real with something that's edited. Instead of truth, it's a polished truth, something we really hope will be more acceptable than the real thing. We can create a fiction around ourselves. We can cover and we can conceal, because being weak, being humiliated, being low to the ground, it's something to resist. And that concealing, that managing of truth, it may have never been easier to do so as it is right now, to shade our truth, to look strong, to seek the applause and the wisdom of other people in our world. You've probably heard of this phenomenon, FOMO, right? Like the fear of missing out. Now, there have been more and more studies conducted to assess the scope and impact of what it means to constantly be able to check in on another person's world online through social media and be able to see the details of their lives. And it creates these comparison points where people are really struggling with FOMO, this fear of missing out. And so people start to modify their realities. They edit their pictures. They tell only the stories that get the applause. And we can begin to curate our lives, and we can be tempted to present only the best of the best things, carefully presenting the things we want to present about ourselves. And it turns out there are very real consequences to this mentality. As we're creating this false reality around ourselves, we're also observing the reality of other people around us. And all of a sudden, well, your vacations are pretty dull compared to those. And your kid never scores the winning goal in soccer. And your relationship looks black and white while everyone else's relationship is in Technicolor. And people are getting married and I'm single, and people are having kids and I don't have any. And people are getting high paying jobs and I don't have one. People are having fun and enjoying their lives and I'm, well, not so much. And we look around and we see other people and they have all the best stuff and I'm left with the drabness of my life. Why is everyone else living a better life than me? Why is their grass so much greener than mine? Why are other people so much happier than me? They actually did a study on this where one group was on vacation and told not to check their social media, and another group was on vacation. They could use their social media however they chose. And what was found is that the people who checked their social media while on vacation were significantly less satisfied with their vacation. It's been shown that people who use social media are much more comparative. They feel much more of a constant need to prove themselves. There was one specific study that was focusing on the use of Facebook and how Facebook made people have lower moment-to-moment happiness, as well as a general decrease in life satisfaction. Participants were texted a couple times a day and asked how they were feeling, their overall satisfaction, what they were doing. And I would also check in and ask, well, how'd you been on Facebook? Have you been around people? Do you feel lonely? Do you feel sad? It's just asking those kinds of questions. And what it revealed was that people who were on Facebook reported significantly lower levels of happiness, as well as a lower overall sense of life satisfaction. You see, because we tend to celebrate the great things online. We sometimes might share the tragedies online. The things people tend to post online are the things that elicit a positive response from other people. But our doubts, our stressors, our conflicts, the things we're embarrassed about and ashamed of, we mostly just show the beautiful pictures. We tend to usually manage our images. We often present our strength. And if we are not very, very careful, we can live lives that lead just to wanting the applause of others. Our weaknesses concealed, our doubts shushed, our insecurities glossed over, our fears, no, our boredom, a lack of purpose and significance, never. And our shared lie, the secret we have, is that I often prefer a powerful lie to a true weakness. Oh, my brothers and sisters of Corinth, Paul writes, you who are tempted to squabble about which teacher is the best, about which one of you deserves the most honor, about which one of you is the strongest or the smartest or the top dog. Oh, my brothers and sisters of Corinth, don't you see that Christ you follow is a crucified Christ? The foolishness of God, death on a cross, the powerful humiliation of God. It lowered the gift of God all the way to the ground so that anyone could reach for it. It wasn't reserved for the highborn or the powerful. It wasn't set aside for the wealthy or the educated. In a world that valued power and pedigree and prestige, the humility of Jesus is like a cosmic joke. The most powerful embracing weakness, the highest born becoming the lowest, the most deserving of honor receiving humiliation and the curse of the cross. You see, the people of Corinth understand Jesus the King. I'm not sure they understood the humiliated Jesus, crucified Jesus. I'm not sure we do either. There's a story about a naval communication between the United States and Canada just off the coast of New Brunswick. And the U.S. captain was told that they were on a collision course. So he gets on the comms with the Canadian officer. Please divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. The Canadian replies, I recommend you divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid a collision. The American gets back on, this is the captain of the U.S. Navy ship. I say again, divert your course 15 degrees to the north. No, the Canadian replies, I say again, you divert your course. And the U.S. captain, he's getting fed up at this point. This is the aircraft carrier USS Lincoln, the second largest ship in the United States Atlantic Fleet. We are accompanied by 3 destroyers, 3 cruisers, and numerous support vessels. I demand that you change your course 15 degrees north. That is 15 degrees north, or countermeasures will be undertaken to assure the safety of the ships. There's a long pause, and the U.S. captain lets his message sink in. Then the voice of the Canadian officer comes back in the line. I'm standing 10 stories up in a lighthouse. Your call. You see, Paul is warning us. He's warning you and he's warning me. We are on a collision course. And as tempted as we are to pursue the goals of this world, to look after ourselves, to put ourselves first, to seek strength and power, Paul knows that their way that is incompatible with the road of Jesus. And he is warning the Christians at Corinth who were dealing with this exact issue, that they were heading straight for the rocks, because this is not the road that Jesus walked, and it is not the road that leads to God. If you and I are going to be following Jesus, we cannot follow him as the Lord, just as Lord or just the King. We need to follow Jesus as crucified. Jesus himself said as much when Jesus said this. Jesus said to all of them, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will save it. If you want to follow Jesus, then you are called to walk the road that Jesus walked, which is a road of self-denial, a road to a humiliating cross. The wisdom of the world says you can do everything you can to save yourself, do everything you can to get ahead, do everything you can to survive. The wisdom of this world is to seek what you deserve, to hold on to power if you can, to tickle your senses and to entertain away your boredom. The foolishness of God says lay yourself down, give yourself away, sacrifice yourself, pour yourself out. In a different letter that Paul was writing to a church, he writes it this way. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. True and proper worship is following a crucified Christ by living crucified lives. You see, in Christ crucified, greatness has been redefined as humility. Victory has been redefined as weakness. True and proper worship has been redefined as sacrifice. And there are people who take on the title of Christian, but who do not seem to be very crucified. I worry that some of us might accidentally be following and worshiping Jesus Caesar and not Jesus Christ crucified. There have been a lot of people who have co-opted Jesus to accomplish their mission, but not Jesus' mission, because his mission was humility and sacrifice and the cross. I think we all need to be really honest with ourselves when it comes to the way we worship and serve and follow Jesus. Am I putting myself off? Am I willing to go second? Will I set aside what I deserve or what I'm owed because I'm following the path of Jesus, the path of the crucified Christ? Do I require to be the center of attention? Do I need to drag everyone's eyes on me? Do I take a posture of humility as the cross requires so that it can be said of you and me that we are following Jesus Christ crucified? A Jewish king coming back, establishing a nation that will rule over other nations? No, that's not the God we follow. A Roman emperor coming with power and strength to conquer? No, not that way either. The road we are called to walk is a road of a crucified Jesus. Not Jesus the emperor, not Jesus the Messiah king, but the humble servant who was crucified. That is who we're invited to follow.